If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who like to walk at night, what's the creepiest thing you've ever experienced? I'm a grad student and my university is within walking distance of my apartment. I used to work quite late into the evening until about 2 summers ago when some guy cut diagonally across an empty intersection to chase me the last block to my place. Thank God the front door to my apartment building uses a tap access key card, otherwise there's no way in hell I would have been able to open the door and slam it shut again in his face in time. I'll never forget the way he glared at me through the glass before running off into the night. I was walking around 3 a.m. with my husband/then boyfriend. We used to do it fairly regularly when we were younger if I stayed with him overnight. My husband was in the middle of telling me something when all of a sudden he freezes and goes dead silent. It's then that I hear what sounds like 2 or 3 babies crying. Just the absolute stillness of the night and then random babies sobbing at the end of the alley we were standing at the mouth of. Creepy as hell, but if there's something wrong we should obviously do something about it. My husband and me followed it to a dumpster. It was a whole fucking bag full of puppies someone had tossed in. They couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 weeks old, and were some sort of small mutt. 2 or 3 of them were dead, but the other 4 were okay, just skinny and making these weird whimpering/crying sounds that sounded like a newborn crying. We got them out and took them to a 24-hour emergency vet, and apparently they were fine but super malnourished. I was away on business in France. Was out for dinner with associates and decided to leave early. It wasn't really that early, maybe 11 p.m., but they were staying. Anyhow, walking alone, near the water, looked out and saw what I can only describe as a mist hanging over the water. Didn't bother me at first. Looked over a little later and it seemed oddly localized, and like it was following me. I kept going, looked back, should not have seen it, but there it was still in my line of vision, so I stopped. And whatever the fuck the thing was, it started coming toward me. It was moving over the water and it was getting bigger. Started walking faster and watching it as I did. I swore it was moving faster. And whatever it was I couldn't recognize. Vapors don't follow you. This thing seriously felt evil and cold to look at. You bet your ass it wasn't a minute more before I started fucking sprinting for the hotel. No idea what it was. By the time I hit the hotel I had lost sight of the water and didn't see it anymore. But man, no grown man should get that scared over something that was probably nothing. I get up and run around 4 a.m. before I have to wake the family up for work/school. One morning, I'm running my usual route when I noticed suddenly there was an angry little person in a wheelchair scowling at me. I stopped, completely freaked out, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why was this person so angry and what are they planning to do to me? It turns out it was just a traffic cone and a wooden barrier once I got close enough, but for a few moments I was terrified that I was going to be murdered by a chair-bound angry little person. I had my eyes checked soon after and most definitely should have been wearing glasses. I used to walk my dog in the park close by after dark. In the winter months the park was pretty lonely. One evening I see this guy walking towards me on the path. My dog was in the bushes looking for squirrels. I don't know what it was about it, but he looked at me and suddenly, like he had made a decision, started coming straight towards me. Might have been he wanted to ask me for the way or something, but something about the situation made me feel suddenly really uneasy. Before he could reach me though, my dog barged out of the bushes, growling, and then the guy changed his mind and walked past us. All in all, the whole thing took maybe a few seconds. I still don't know if my dog picked up on my uneasiness or if there was really just something threatening in that guy's behavior. Also, once I was walking around our village at night because I couldn't sleep. I just started walking and was just at the edge of the village when I saw something moving in one of the gardens. It was bigger than an animal but smaller than a person and moving slowly but steadily towards me. I kinda froze and just stood there, but whatever it was kept creeping up to me. Turned out the people had one of those automatic lawn mowers and had it set to mow at night. I was about 17 at the time and was walking home at around 3 in the morning. About a block from my street I look down the road, I see a tall figure, and I mean inhumanly tall, walking slowly across the road. It looked to be wearing bright white cloth. Now the KKK was headquartered in my town in the 1920s and it's still a pretty racist town, but nobody is that tall. I don't believe in ghosts either, so honestly I was a little freaked out by this. Though I kept walking. Once I got to my street I was reasonably sketched out. A couple of the street lights were out so the street was dark. I had a feeling I was being followed and watched since I saw said figure. Even once I got back to my house I didn't feel too great. Didn't stop me from going out the next night though. I'm a night shift worker, so I have weird sleep hours. My gym closes early, so around 2 a.m., I went for a run. I don't live in the boondocks or anything, but there's a park across the street that opens into a wash/desert area. I'm walking during my cool down around 3 a.m., minding my own business with my headphones in, when I see a flashlight up ahead where the desert area is. It's kind of waving around upward in the air. I pause my music and here I said, "Do you need help?" This guy sounds very angry, but also sober. I freeze, turn the light off of my phone, hoping he can't see me. There are no street lights on my street. But I see the flashlight getting closer to me, so I slowly start walking backwards. The guy starts yelling this crazy shit like you need to answer me when I'm talking to you. Dumb cunt. I was terrified because I could not see him at all, but he apparently could see me. I pick up the pace and decided against calling the cops because I didn't want to attract further attention to myself. I start to slowly jog before running the fuck away as fast as I could, all while the flashlight is getting closer more quickly and he's angrily yelling things like "You are being rude, you stupid bitch." I didn't tell anyone I had gone out for a run, as it was the middle of the night and I live alone. Ike, what the fuck the guy was doing in the middle of the desert at 3 a.m., but he sure was pissed that I was there. I used to walk home from work in the dark during winter. One night an old guy pulled over, said he'd been watching me walk home for a few weeks and that there was always an old guy following me. He wanted to give me a lift home so I wouldn't get hurt. Another old bloke with a dog came running out of the darkness yelling at the man in the car about harassing young girls. They were both distracted screaming at each other, so I fucking ran. An hour later there's a knock on the door. In the light I realized the old bloke with the dog was my neighbor. He changed his evening walk route so he could make sure I was getting home safe. The next evening I was walking home and the old bloke in the car pulled over again. He said my neighbor had explained the situation and he just wanted to check with me. While I was talking to him another car pulled over and two men got out yelling at the first car man. Then neighbor came running out of the darkness and all four guys were screaming at each other. I turned on the light on my phone. The two new guys were my coworker and his boyfriend. They had also been following me home to make sure I was safe. Once everyone stopped yelling at each other, we were able to sort the story out and everyone went home. The next night the creepy old lady on my street corner was waiting for me at her front gate. She told me she'd been watching the shit show and wanted me to come inside so those bad men won't murder you. She was holding a dead cat. I was walking at around 4 a.m. when a police car drove up the hill in the road where I can't see past, but the weird thing was I didn't hear it coming. It made no noise whatsoever, and it just slowly came to a stop next to me. He rolled down his window, and I thought he was going to make me go home, because legally I can't be out that late at night by myself. Instead he asked if I had a weapon, and I showed him a knife I had with me, cause it's sketch as fuck at 4 a.m. where I live. He wished me good luck and drove off, but when I looked back the car wasn't there, which was even weirder. Fast forward 20 minutes and a guy walked out of the wooded area with a small knife and told me to give him my phone and wallet etc. Well, my knife was significantly bigger than his so he backed off. Mine was a hunting knife, and his looked more like a Swiss Army multi-tool size. I felt like I knew the police officer person I saw, and he looked just like my grandpa who died a couple of years before I was born. So, pretty much I think I saw a ghost of my grandpa disguised as a police officer warning me about an upcoming attempted mugging. I was walking home from work when I was 18 before I had a car. My neighborhood had no street lights except for one on a very small stretch of road with no houses for some reason. My neighborhood is right off the highway and my house is about 3/4 of a mile in with a bunch of twists and turns. Your typical suburban twins and singles neighborhood but without any streetlights. Well, one night I began the walk and saw ahead of me a guy walking in the middle of the road. At 1 a.m., I immediately get sketched out. I decide to just walk past him and avoid eye contact and just hurry home. I get closer and I realize this dude is naked and walking extremely slowly. He wasn't old and looked a little fat with a strange body shape. Looked like a typical demon, you could say. Cue freak out. I stop and just close my eyes and try not to cry or scream because on top of this weird as fuck situation I had one of the worst gut feelings ever. I knew this shit was not right. I wait 5 minutes and decide I need to get home because I have to get up in 4 hours for school and I don't really have any other options. This thing was walking slow enough where I easily would have caught up to it or even been within sight of it within a couple minutes. But it was gone. I ran the rest of the way home and told no one about it. After that night I never walked home on that route again. I felt safer going through a dark field and taking a longer way. Just before midnight one night a couple of years ago, I was getting my 10K steps in with my music playing softly on my headphones. About 5 or 6 kilometers into my walk, I found myself on a nice residential street I'd never walked down before. It was early December and many of the homes had their Christmas lights on. I remember thinking how nice the area was and even planning to return the next evening. Then, out of the blue, a very tall and thin 20-something guy wearing black from head to toe came out of nowhere, did a backflip right in front of me, and continued parkouring until he was perched on top of a car parked in someone's driveway about 10 meters from where I was standing. I was shocked into immobility by the bizarre occurrence, and all I could do was look at him stupidly. He looked back at me for a few seconds, and then did a crazy-ass dismount off the car and ran off down the street out of sight. I haven't walked down that street since. I used to work the late shift at a grocery store and would always go for a walk around when I got home. One summer I fostered a litter of puppies and had just checked on them for the final time that night before I went for my usual walk around the neighborhood. About 10 minutes into the walk I passed an alley and saw one of my puppies. It was wandering farther into the dark of the alley and doing that slow, wobbly walk that really young puppies do. I took a single, automatic step towards it before realizing that something didn't feel right. When I hesitated at the entrance of the alley, the puppy suddenly turned and scuttled up a nearby telephone pole. I noped out of there pretty quickly and didn't walk that route again for a long time. I still don't know what that thing was. The tail and body shape were wrong for a raccoon. There's probably a rational explanation, but that night I was convinced that something was pretending to be a puppy in order to lure me into a dark alley. I was walking back from grabbing dinner with friends. It was snowing and we had been drinking, about 8 p.m. on a Tuesday, and we passed by a closed Chinese food restaurant that's been abandoned for months. As we get close to the end of the parking lot, a woman pulls up and asks us when the place opens because she has a meeting there at 9. Like I said, this place has been closed for months. It's relatively well lit because it's next to a gas station, but the building and sign are starting to fall apart and the parking lot is completely snowed over. We suggested some places that had similar names close by, but she refused to believe she was in the wrong place. She even showed us her GPS that led her to this place. Even if it was open, it would be a weird place and time for a meeting. She did have a bunch of stuff in her back seat, maybe an MLM thing? She then asks if my friends and I want to ride back to our apartment. We said no because it wasn't far, pretty much across the road. She shrugged and then waited to go park in a spot. It was just odd. I'm sure she found 3 tipsy 20-something-year-old women walking in freezing weather at night just as odd. My friends and I used to find remote woods and start up mini campfires at night, so we'd have somewhere semi-warm to smoke around that wasn't one of our parents' house. This wasn't particularly legal, so we kept on our toes. There are 6 of us, and after hearing a loud bang that's oddly out of place in the woods at 1 a.m., half of us decide to bail. We start walking up the trail, lit up with a cell phone's light, and get to the wooden bridge that crosses the river. This is a weird bridge, with 6 feet walls up on its sides. We hear another freaky loud bang and turn around towards the fire and our dumbass friends who were taking way too long to catch up, and that's when we see it. A bunch of kids were hanging down from the bridge's walls. No movement or sound, just them hanging there like they were possessed, or hiding. I've never seen my friends nope out of a situation so fast, closing every phone light and holding on to each other's sleeves. Like we have to go, now. We locked ourselves in the car in silence once we got out of there, and the 3 idiots who had stayed back caught up soon enough. None of them had seen anything weird, and they were proud to tell us that the explosion we heard had been them throwing a lighter in the flames. Had they been smart enough not to, we'd never turned around and seen those kids. Or whoever they were. We used to night walk all the time, and my roommate and I would always hear the same fucking noise. It didn't matter where we were. What street we were on. If it was the woods or in the city. And no matter how close we thought we were getting to it, it always sounded the same distance away. It happened every night at midnight until about 4 or 5 a.m. The best I can describe it is a child's plastic trumpet toy/toy horn mixed with a very low-pitched bird call. Similar to the sounds peacocks make. That doesn't really do the sound justice, but I have no idea what to call it. We googled peacock noises and that alone wasn't it. We googled types of bird calls common to our area and various owl calls, but none of those sound close at all. It was way too loud and uniform to be an insect. It went on for over 2 years, and no matter how long we followed the sound, we never figured out what it was. We've since moved and no longer hear it, but if I go back to that side of town and walk at night, you bet your ass the sound's still there. The leading theory we have is it's some kind of owl that was in a terrible accident and now has very fucked up vocal cords. Whatever it is, it's fucking loud, and I'm glad we moved. My running route ended with me running down a mile-long street that was flanked by woods on both sides. Sometimes I would lose track of time. I ran right by my boss's house, and a lot of times he would be out and we would talk, and would end up finishing my run well into the night. One night I was finishing my run at almost 10, and as soon as I turn into the wooded street, an SUV turns and follows me at 7 miles per hour for the entire road. I know it might not sound that scary, but I am a tiny girl, and having this guy's headlights on my back for the entire stretch of pitch black secluded road almost made me puke from fear. When I got to where I turned into a neighborhood, he peeled off. The next week I was in a similar situation of finishing my run in the dark. I know it's stupid, but I live in Florida and there is a very small window of time where it is cool enough to run, only this time it's storming a bit. I was coming down the same street when along one of the bends I see the same car, pulled to the side with the headlights off but still running. It was very dark and I could hardly see it, but it was there. I stopped in my tracks hoping that it wasn't the same car, but I was pretty sure it was. After what felt like maybe 5 minutes of standing around waiting for him to drive away, a big flash of lightning went off. I saw not only the guy in the driver's seat, but that there was another man standing halfway in the woods just off to the right of the sidewalk. He seemed to be looking right at me. I turned and sprinted all the way back to my boss's house, which must have taken me a good 15 terrifying minutes. In that time I felt what it must feel like to be a deer being chased by a mountain lion. My boss drove me home, and when we passed by where they were gone. I reversed my run, so I ran down that street first after that night. I was on my bike riding through the woods with the moonlight. I had ridden these trails thousands of times and had been doing them for hours each day for cyclocross. I liked to ride at night because it was nice and cool with little traffic if I needed to be on the road, and it helped romanticize my intense training. Anyways, I was riding around the south side of the CR Dam in trails that I made a decade ago and was having a great time riding easy but fast. I stopped to look out in by the south side of the South Island to look at the 610 bridge and then drink some water when a guy said, "Hey, how's it going?" I didn't see him. I didn't know he was there. I had been riding around for a few hours and it was like 1 a.m. It scared the shit out of me because I am usually very alert to make sure I don't run into people wandering around, and this guy just appeared out of nowhere. I wondered how long he had been there and if he had been there other nights. I just kinda said something like "I'm good," then hammered straight home. I even took the paved path back on the north side. I went so direct. I walk my dog at anywhere from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. because she isn't socialized and will lunge/snarl because she was abused or neglected by her previous owners, so it's best if I minimize the odds of running into other people or animals. Every once in a while a big truck will subtly fuck with me. It will slow down and follow me for a few seconds, then speed off and sometimes drive around the block and blast past me again at a rapid speed. I don't give whoever it is the satisfaction of looking at them or acknowledging them, so I have no idea if it's the same truck every time or not. A few weeks ago this idiot decided to honk at me. At 11:30 at night. In the middle of a sleeping neighborhood. Before speeding off again. If they ever decided to mess with me in person, I'd let my dog take care of it. She doesn't bite, but she's scary as hell, but it's still surreal when I think about it. I can't wrap my head around why anyone would act like that in the first place. There's nothing remarkable looking about me that should cause anyone to single me out at all other than wearing glasses. The weirdest thing I've ever experienced though was when I was walking through a darker part of the neighborhood with fewer houses. Across the street is an empty field, and on the edge of the block is a lone house set back from the street behind a big yard, a fence, and some trees. I walked past it often and without incident, but that night I heard the distinct, eerie sound of a woman's mournful sobs echoing through the air. This crying was unnaturally loud and I couldn't identify where it was coming from, like it was all around me. I assumed it was coming from the house, but I have no idea for sure. This shit was loud enough that it sounded like it was being enhanced by a sound system of some sort. My best guess is that whoever was crying was sitting on the house's porch or in the yard and just happened to be projecting in my direction, and sound carries more at night. I've never heard anything else like it in all my nights out walking, and I have no idea why someone would be outside crying in the dead of night in late fall. I'm uncertain about whether this is what you're looking for, yet it did happen in the wee hours of a very dark night. I had gotten off work at 2 a.m. and was walking through the empty parking lot to get to my car. Nobody was around. But, as I got closer to my car, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't look back. I was overcome by fear and began to run to my car. I got to my car and jumped inside and locked the doors as soon as I was safely inside. That's when things began to get a bit more frightening. A man was standing outside my car door asking me to roll my window down. I refused. He grew angry at my refusal and began pounding on my window. I began backing out of the parking lot, and as I did, he let out a blood-curdling scream. I looked and saw him holding his leg as he screamed for me to help him as I had run over his foot. Even though his face seemed contorted with pain, my gut told me not to get out of the car. I kept driving. My apartment was only a 5-minute drive from my workplace. When I arrived home, I called the police to let them know what had happened. 2 police officers came to my home to take my report. As they sat there with me, They sent another patrol car to the parking lot to look for the injured man. The police didn't find anyone there. They also informed me that they hadn't received any reports of such an injury. They told me that I'd done the right thing by not stopping my car, as it was most likely a ruse to lure me out of my car. I was so very thankful that I didn't stop my car to check on this man. And it was a huge relief to know that I hadn't injured anybody. But, after feeling relief, the reality of what he may have done to me set in. The events of that night traumatized me so badly that I couldn't bring myself to return to the job. The road I walked down is surrounded mostly by sprawling pastures and dense forest, with a few houses sprinkled in. I have heard foxes, coyotes, and cougars scream, which is unsettling since there are very few houses and therefore no lights. I've watched groups of hogs move through pastures in the moonlight. But I walk mostly during large moon cycles, just so I can see in case of snakes on the road. One night I couldn't sleep, so I laced up my shoes and took off. I was about 2 miles from home when I heard something big moving in the brush to my left, slightly ahead of me. Cougars are damn near silent, and coyotes chirp and cackle. This was just going through everything. I slowed down, to put more space between us. I started walking backwards when the heavy footfall stopped and I heard a super low sigh that sounded like it said, "No." All the hair on my neck stood up and I fixated on the shadows in the trees. About 50 ahead, this huge black mass crawled out of the trees, snapping twigs as it moved. It turned toward me and stood upright, sniffing the air. It was a black bear. The first one I've ever seen in the wild, and the result of a huge reintroduction project in my state. I went from scared shitless to amazed immediately. It considered me for a minute before I said, "Bear, there's a fence that way. You got to go down the road a bit." Then it lowered back down and walked along the fence until it reached the woods on the other side. Super cool encounter, but terrifying. Neighbors across the street informed us and others someone had been peeping in their daughter's basement window. They found some footprints or something, so I had started smoking my cigs in my driveway kinda behind my house instead of out front. So anyway, one night I was out enjoying a cigarette near my backyard while letting the dog out around 4 a.m. I heard some steps in the street and some sliding, and stood behind my car to see what's up. An old man was struggling to get down the street because it's iced over, and he's sliding down and goes down my neighbor's driveway. At this point I'm sure this is the man my neighbor spoke of. I pop inside and grab a blunt object and come back out to see where he goes next. About 15 minutes later he comes back out from the other side of the house. My neighbor and they're happily chatting as the old man goes on his way to continue delivering papers. He parked at the top of our street/hill so he wouldn't have to drive on the ice. It was rather spooky and I thought I was about to have to detain an old man. On another much shorter story, I went to pick up my sister from the bars. She said to hurry up cause some guy was acting weird around her. I get there and he immediately walks away from her and her friends. They get in the car and before I'm even on to the next block the weirdo guy stabs the next person he found. Shit was super wild. I used to walk to work very early in the morning and have a few good stories. The one that really scared the crap out of me, at least at the time, is one I've shared before. I live out in the middle of the countryside, in a small farming village. My work is about an hour-and-a-half walk away. If I'm heading in early, there's no public transport so I take a walk along the canal side which leads me right to town. This morning I was setting off at 5:30. The first leg of the journey is across a horse field and a small hill. This bit has no lighting at all. As I get to the bottom of the hill I'm just coming out of pitch black and into where there's street lights again. The street lights at this point have been damaged for a few months now and a couple of them flicker, which just adds to the creepy, since the area is absolutely steeped in local folklore. Over the years a couple of old people have fell into the canal around this area. A car full of teenagers came off the road there and into the canal. To top it off, there's a railway bridge over the canal where, legend has it, a young boy was hit by a train in the 50s/60s and lost his legs. He bled out on the bridge, trying to drag himself home. There's a shit ton of ghost stories that are circulated in the local newsletter every October and it's creepy to walk through anyway. As I'm coming off the hill and onto the road I hear these weird noises like children. I'm looking around wondering where the noise is coming from. I'm hard of hearing, have a hearing aid but don't often have it on, other than for meetings, so I'm not really sure what I'm hearing to be honest. When this god-awful crying, like a baby crying but really off, starts coming from the canal. I'm still in the road by this point, I haven't crossed over so I'm pretty freaked out. It's cold so mist is just rolling off the water and creeping across the road. The lights are flickering and this almost but not quite human wailing is going off just through the bushes. As I'm trying to work out what the hell this noise is and what I should do, it erupts into screams. High-pitched like a toddler in agony. At this point I figure it has to be a kid who's hurt themselves, and if I don't man the fuck up and help I won't ever forgive myself. I run across the road, push through the bushes and get onto the canal. Nothing. The noise stops, I stop and look around. There's nothing there at all, just the rolling mist and flickering lights. I walk around a bit to have a good look, heart in my throat. Silence, nothing there. I figure it must be something else that I've misheard. As I start heading back to the road, thoroughly freaked out by the whole thing, I see two great yellow eyes staring back at me from the bushes. This weird noise just erupts, this time completely inhuman. The bush goes fucking crazy, I scream every swear word I can think of and fall backwards, nearly landing in the canal. Two little foxes go darting out of the bush. Fuck those things. Nearly gave me a heart attack and or drowned me in the canal. Was at a camping place with my family as a young kid, at a campground for camping trailers. This would have been around 1985. The lodge had one arcade game, Donkey Kong Jr. I had just used up all $2 I had been given to play for that night, and was walking back to our lot alone. I was 6 at the time. At one point, passing some deep bushes, I heard someone back in there. They sounded like they were seriously hurt and in a serious amount of pain. I was peering through the bushes trying to find the source, going up and down the path along the bushes, trying to locate the noise. At one point I stopped cold, because I noticed something really strange. All at once I realized that whoever was back there, making all kinds of hurt noises, sounded like they were having fun doing it. It was a really unnerving realization. A moment after I froze, an arm shot out and tried to grab me. I ran like hell. I never looked back. I told my parents about it, of course, but they chalked it up to an overly imaginative kid. I can't blame them. 1985. That kind of stuff happened in rural PA only in the movies. But I remember all of it very clear. I was young and this was the early 90s before stranger danger really took hold in my area, though it was starting to spread a bit at that time. I was allowed to walk the 2 blocks between my house and my aunt's house alone. Our houses backed up against a cemetery. Looking back, what I saw was most likely a flare. But let me tell you, 8-year-old me had no idea what a bright light shooting up out of a cemetery in the dark and just sort of hanging in the air could possibly be. Even looking back, why the fuck was someone shooting off flares in a cemetery? Anyway, I stopped walking home alone at night after that. Probably for the best, honestly. A few years after that, stranger danger became a thing in my area and parents became paranoid anyway, so I would likely not have been allowed to for those reasons if not for scary flare gun ghost reasons. I used to moonlight, at a local 24/7 chain store as the maintenance guy a few nights a week to pick up extra cash. The work was easy, the money was good, and I'm not a huge sleeper, so it just made sense. I'd walk there every night. It was only a mile from my house, it was great clear your head time, and if I cut through the boneyard, I could do it in 10 minutes with ease. The cemetery itself was big because it was old. Monuments, creepy once taken care of statues ripped right out of episodes of Doctor Who where you're not allowed to blink, basically every Scooby-Doo cartoon, ever. This didn't bug me. While I do believe in the supernatural, it's more in the realm of possibility than actuality to me, so things like ghosts, vengeful phantoms and whatever else could be lurking in old country graveyard at midnight were never a bother or a concern, or much more than an amused passing thought. So one night I'm on my normal walk, had just hopped the chain to the cemetery that keeps cars from driving in, and I look up because I can't believe how dark it is. No stars, no moon, no clouds, just an endless sea of pure blackness, which doesn't bother me at all because I scoff I say, at all things ghostly. And then something shoves me. Hard. And I scream. I scream like the little bitch that I never knew I was. Spinning wildly I flail like a fat kid falling off a swing set looking for my ghostly attacker, but there is nothing around me. Nothing but a candle flame-shaped ball of pure white bobbing in mid-air, suspended by nothing more than the vengeful spirits that I so callously blew off, and the body of the white-tailed deer that I must have startled, causing to run away from me, but brush up against me as it did. Nothing supernatural, nothing ghostly, but easily the most horrifying 7 seconds of my life as my brain fought to identify what it was and my imagination filled the void with every bad horror movie I've ever watched. In college I was walking back to my dorm from a friend's late night from studying. Our campus was pretty safe at that time, so I wasn't really worried. As I was cutting through the courtyard of the dorms I noticed a guy stumbling down the street that ran parallel to the dorm complex. Again, pretty normal since our dorm complex was right next to the local bars, but as soon as he saw me he stopped stumbling and started crossing the street towards me. I was always taught if something like this ever happens, don't show fear, acknowledge their presence, and stare that fucker down. Didn't work. He's still heading straight towards me with a purpose. So I start speed walking, he starts speed walking. I start running, he starts running. I'm maybe 20 feet from the entrance when someone slams open the door and screams hey at this guy. He bolts off and I run into the building lobby. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, whoever you were, random freshman girl. I'll never know what that guy was going to do, but because of you I never had to find out. Sometimes I work late and have to take the bus home. It's about an hour bus ride from work, but the bus drops me of about a 1 block from my apt. However short, it's a dark walk at night that includes a dip under a railroad bridge. This railroad bridge and creek area are home to a few homeless people. So one night I cross the street at the intersection at the bus stop and start walking towards my apt when I see a shape in the darkness near the bridge. It's clearly a person moving around, but meandering, and as I'm coming up on them it seems like they don't notice me approaching, and now headed towards me. Odd, because at night I walk with my cell phone light on so I can see and others can see me. I deliberately tried to avoid this person, who I now recognize as a male. But instead of avoiding me he walks right into me. Physically collides with me and acts astonished. Just flabbergasted that here I am and he ran into me. I was more annoyed than afraid because I felt like in trying to avoid me he deliberately ran into me. It was weird. When my late Dutch Shepherd was still alive, he was already getting quite old. Sometimes I woke up around 1 to 2 a.m. to walk him once more so he didn't need to rush in the morning. He was very protective of me, so walking him at night was my favorite time of the day, because we wouldn't run into anything and we could walk in peace, except for the part where I have nyctalopia so I can't see what's in front of me or behind me at all. I kind of depended on my dog to lead us home lol. Normally everything was calm at night. We lived in rural area, there were only few street lights and no sound at all, especially if the wind was silent. Just serene. One particular night I felt nervous for no apparent reason. I thought it was just me at first. I'm a big pussy, so I tend to imagine evil. We always turned around at a streetlight to go back home. I could see my house from there during daylight, so it wasn't that far away. I always made sure not to go into the woods at nighttime. There was very little wind, but once I turned my back to the pole there was a really harsh gush of wind that nearly knocked me over, and my dog suddenly started aggressively pulling on the leash back to the pole while growling loudly. After a couple of seconds the wind was gone and he relaxed and turned back around to go home. It was really weird. Perhaps it was just a response to the wind, but it was so out of character that it particularly chilled me. He was old, but his sight and hearing was still in perfect condition. I think I didn't walk him out of the street for another week that time lol. Wasn't walking, but rather I had just gotten home from work at 3 a.m. I pulled up to my house, parked, turned the car off, and started getting all my shit together to go inside. I was about to get out of the car when I noticed a guy walking slowly down the street, staring at a tablet. I sat and watched, waiting for him to pass, as I am a petite female that doesn't want to get raped or assaulted. He stopped in front of my neighbor's house and started tapping away furiously on his tablet. He was there for about 5 minutes before leaving. I thought it was weird and sketchy, but I didn't think anything of it until a few months later. I was talking to my parents on the phone the other day, and they said the FBI was in their neighborhood staking out a guy who was a notorious identity thief. They knew this because one of their friends in a different part of the neighborhood had an unmarked black van parked in front of the house. When the husband went to go talk to the driver to make sure they weren't pedophiles stalking their children, the driver said they're part of the FBI doing a stakeout on their next door neighbor, an identity thief. I guess the guy moved to my parents' neighborhood and was walking around, finding unsecured home networks and fishing for data by connecting to those networks. He chose my parents' neighborhood because it's fairly wealthy. The homes start at $500,000 for a townhouse and everyone drives BMWs and Cadillacs. I told my parents about my experience seeing the mysterious stranger at my neighbor's house at 3 a.m., and my parents said that was probably him, because the neighbors got their identities stolen and they were having problems finding a new house. I used to go on long walks at night back when I lived with my parents. Used to walk down this one really long straight suburban street. I would walk in the middle of the road because there were no cars that late, and I didn't like that if I walked on the sidewalk someone could theoretically jump out at me from a yard or car without me having time to react. Once in the distance I saw someone else, so far away they were barely visible, also walking in the middle of the road. It took me a little while to be sure we were walking toward each other. I stopped walking, and so did they. I started walking again and they started walking too. I stopped. They stopped. I waved. They did not wave back. I started walking again, and so did they. I got creeped out and turned, walking back toward home. I looked over my shoulder a minute later and the person was coming toward me at a full run, and they'd cleared about half the distance between us since I turned around. I bolted. Got home without incident, didn't stop walking at night, but I didn't walk down that one street for a couple of weeks. Wasn't out for a walk, but the house I used to live in was semi-deep in the woods of Richmond, Rhode Island. It was a summer night in 2009, so the windows were open. I lived on a private dirt road with 5 other families, each lot consisting of 5 acres, so you couldn't see the next houses since the lots were wooded. I was playing FFXI, so my attention was diverted, but I heard what I thought at the time was a woman screaming coming from down the street. I didn't think much of it since my closest neighbors were best classified as swamp Yankee lowlifes, think woodsy rednecks without a southern accent. They routinely had domestic disturbances involving screaming at each other. Then the scream sounded again a lot closer to the front of my house. Only this time it was more of a shriek. Now I get up from playing, and start to wonder if someone is getting killed not so far from my house. So I grab a baseball bat, and head outside. I hear it again directly in front of my house on the road, which is about 100 feet from my front yard. Now I am a fairly large human, 6 feet 1 inch 250 pounds, and somewhat of a bad motherfucker. I don't scare easy, but this noise is crazy, and now sounds more animal in nature than human. The only thing I can compare it to is when monkeys or apes shriek, that high-pitched shriek I've seen in nature videos. I realize these are animals I'm dealing with now. Specifically one animal killing another one. I am picturing a wolf or coyotes taking down a deer, but I wonder if it is possible some wild animals are killing one of my neighbor's dogs. I also had dogs, and cats. My dogs were in the house, but some of the cats were outside, and not accounted for. So even though it is pitch black, and this sound is freaking me out, I cross the dirt road into the lot across from my house. This lot is not developed, so no house, just woods. I get about 40 feet off the road into the woods, and I hear movement in front of me. I crouch down, and listen. There is no more shrieking. No more noise at all except for nighttime woods noises. Wind, trees swaying, etc. So I begin to advance again slowly. That's when it happened. In the blink of an eye I hear a heavy weight, guessing a full-grown deer, get dragged 15 to 20 feet across the forest floor just ahead of me. I mean, this was practically instantaneous. That primal adrenaline cold sweat of dread washes across my entire body. I realize this isn't a pack of coyotes, or a wolf. Mind you, I have seen the largest of wolves close up before. I adopted a wolf/husky once from a group who located homes for abused wolves where suburban morons had got them as pets, then realized they had made a big mistake. When I went to pick him up, the woman had 2 wolves that were humongous, easily twice the size of the 50 pounds one I was adopting. Whatever had dragged this deer 15 to 20 feet in the blink of an eye had done so effortlessly. I knew whatever had been that close to me was far larger, and more powerful than anything I had come into contact with before. I noped the fuck out of there at light speed, and back into my house. I stopped by my neighbors' houses the next day to ask about their animals. The aforementioned swamp Yankee said his dog had been missing for a couple weeks. I explained what had occurred the night before, and we agreed that dog was most likely toast. I spoke with the animal control officer, and she said a deer's dying shrieks can sound eerily like a human woman. Learn something new every day. Last Halloween, I was walking to a friend's house for a party. It was in the suburbs, and totally safe. Never gave it a second thought. I was probably 500 feet from my friend's house when 3 guys rushed me and put a gun to my head. They kidnapped me, made me walk them to an ATM to empty my bank account. They then made me walk them to my friend's house so they could rob him. I bided my time, led them to a random street, and ran when I had an opportunity. They caught me and started beating me. A random guy with a CCW came out of nowhere and threatened to shoot them. They ran, were caught, and are now facing 15 years in prison. That was the scariest Halloween of my life. I live right by a park with a wooded area. There is one fox that is gigantism. So I decided to go for a walk a couple of summers ago. I usually do the same 2.5-mile walk during the day, but my schedule did not allow this. So I'm about a mile from home when I realize I'm being followed. Fucking great. I turn around and about 100 feet away is the goddamn night fox, that's what we locals call him. So I stand there. Psych myself up about being the apex predator. Then remember I was raised by my grandmother and am delicate, as she used to say. So I realize I can't just give it a Diet Coke and passive aggressive it into submission. It is still ever so slowly coming at me. So I think to the Discovery Channel. Make yourself big to scare it away. I had a super light jacket on. I started swinging that in the air and jingling my keys. It stopped. Cocked the head like 45 degrees. If it could have spoke, it would have said aloud, "What the fuck are you doing, guy? I've lost all interest in eating you. I mean, holy shit. Can you imagine what you look like?" Then it slowly backed away, still looking at me like I was some kind of giant mental defect that would probably taste bad or be poisonous. Then we both kind of walked away.